Another lost 1960s Doctor Who story has been animated, The Celestial Toymaker, a first Doctor story featuring the titular Toymaker, who made his most recent appearance in the 2023 episode, The Giggle. In the past, fans have only been able to experience the Toymaker's first appearance through surviving audio and photo reconstructions, but now they can see the story in HD widescreen colour animation. The Doctor, Stephen and Dodo find themselves in the Toymaker's realm. The Toymaker, a powerful god-like being, forces the Doctor's friends to play sadistic children's games, where if they lose, they will die. Think Play School meets Saw, but like family friendly. The Celestial Toymaker was the 7th serial of Season 3. Episodes 1 to 3 are missing from the BBC's archive, and only episode 4, The Final Test, survives. The Final Test was returned to the BBC in 1984 when it was found during a routine inspection of the ABC's French Forest Studios film archive in Australia. But we're not here to talk about the original production. We're here to talk about the brand new animation done by the team at Shapeshifter Studios. First thoughts. The Celestial Toymaker is one of those stories that has a huge myth surrounding it. It's heralded as one of the best missing stories of all time, yet I've never been the biggest fan of the story. To me, I think it's a great idea in concept, but in execution, not so much. So when this animation was announced, I was hesitant. Doctors, don't get me wrong, but most of the animations tended to be second Doctor stories, so it was nice to just change it up. I also wasn't a big fan of Shapeshifter's previous release, The Web of Fear 3. I have given The Web of Fear a crime against humanity. An animation would have been preferable, or maybe not, and the Brigadier looks like a Roblox. Imagine if I did a video where I didn't complain about the Web of Fear animation for like 5 minutes. But don't worry, many of my complaints from that animation, such as awkward movement and undetailed character models, have been improved upon massively. So let's just jump straight into it. The biggest improvement over the Web of Fear is the character movement. In Web of Fear 3, it was a bit manic and at points janky. The motion tracking just wasn't as smooth as it could have been. It's clear the team took those criticisms and had worked really hard on improving it, and I think it paid off. The movement feels natural and isn't distracting. You don't pay attention to it, which is a sign of a job well done when it comes to animation, in my opinion. But don't get me wrong, they can still show off and be fancy with their wonderful new sets and camera movements, but the characters are just performing, as it should be. The likenesses are a bit hit and miss. Dodo has probably the closest resemblance, and Stephen and the Doctor probably the worst, but once you get used to it, you don't really notice. I think the general rule, for me, is if you can tell which character is which and the style is consistent throughout the entire program, it's somewhat successful. The facial movement is still quite limited. Some moments aren't sold as much as live action would, but it's serviceable. I think if Shapeshifter get a chance to do a further release, I would love if they could improve on this more. But maybe this is as good as the software will allow. I don't know. I've only ever animated in a 2D space, with some minor 3D work, but nothing with like characters like this, so it's quite unfamiliar to me. Honestly, I'm really happy that Shapeshifter Studios got another shot at animating a Doctor Who release, because it's clear that they're passionate about the show, and this release proved that given time, they can make a really solid animation. Many of the characters received a redesign. The actors playing dolls are now actual dolls.
The dolls are the dolls.
Playing cards are now playing cards, and porcelain toys have such detailed textures, and it really feels like these are just toys that have been brought to life, rather than humans acting as if they were toys. I think it's a really smart change that I think really improves the story. Even changing the animation style in order to make the cards feel as if they're stop motion. But, of course, these changes aren't for everybody. Artistic liberties. Creative liberties and alterations to the original episodes are always controversial. Essentially, the argument boils down to two camps. Camp A thinks the animation should be an accurate recreation of the original episodes, as close as they can get it. Follow the camera scripts, no alterations. Camp A prioritizes the production over the story. Camp B is generally fine with alterations if it enhances the story. If the original production, the general line that I've heard is that the teams try to find a middle ground, that these releases are to be brought by all fans, not just a select few. 16:9 HD color is what general audiences are used to, and I can respect that. But for me, I find that the alterations are hit and miss. Sometimes they're great changes, like the macro crab or the scale of the sets in Eve of the Daleks, but sometimes they can go just a bit too far. And sometimes not far enough. I think because this story is such an experimental and out there serial, the changes in my opinion are brilliant. The reimagined games and the stories are faithful to the original, but given extra heights, literally. They're defying gravity. It adds a level of danger the original didn't have. The original production has been compared, possibly unfairly, to Play School, whereas the new versions don't really conjure up the same comparison. The Toymaker's power now feels so much stronger. He can change his size at will, and it feels a lot closer to the new series interpretation of the character. I love that the games feel as if they're tabletop games, with the Toymaker sitting at the table playing with them. It's such a smart creative addition and doesn't feel out of place. The major issue with these changes is when they don't match the audio. This is an issue I had with Fury from the Deep. In the audio, the footsteps walk across a small set, but in the animation, it's a massively long corridor, and the footsteps just don't match. There's a moment in episode 4 of the Celestial Toymaker where Steven asks why they just can't walk to the next triangle instead of jumping. In the animation, it comes across as kind of a stupid question because he would obviously fall to his death. But in the original episode, the triangle is just off the ground. It's the little things like that that just don't add up when it's being animated with such massive changes. Of course, having the potential to fall to their death is way scarier, and I think it's a brilliant choice visually, but the original audio just doesn't match it. Then you ask the question, should they adjust or trim the dialogue in order to match these new changes? And to many, that would be just sacrilegious.
Dalek said it's stuffed!
I personally can just overlook it, but I understand that others would be really annoyed by that. Yet there are many new additional sound effects added to the animation. During the game Blind Man's Bluff, they've added a car for Dodo and Clara to move around in. In the original, it was just a booth. So they've added some car sound effects, and I think this is the correct decision since it marries the audio to the new animation better. But sometimes they've elected not to add new audio. There's a moment where characters jump and no thump accompanies it. It does feel like the animation team or the director are still trying to find out where the line is. And that's the issue. Where is the line when everyone feels so different about it? If you change the sets, the costumes, the scripts, the audio, is it even the original story? In this case, even with all of these changes, all these fancy effects at its core, it is still the exact same story. It's the same story that's in the script. It's still about a crazed toymaker from outside of time who loves playing sadistic children's games. Do these changes help elevate the story? That's kind of for you to decide. Personally, I think it has added an extra level of malice to the story, and was the first time I really properly enjoyed the Celestial Toymaker. The character has so much potential, and I think Russell T Davies did a great job when he brought him back in The Giggle. And I think the animation team did their best to bring that malice back to the character of the past. Also, there is a sequence in episode 3 that I won't spoil that is just breathtaking. Just before the dancing dolls. You'll either love it or hate it, but it's something to keep an eye out for. 3D versus 2D. Historically, I've always been in the favor of 2D animation over 3D animation. I just feel as if with a smaller budget, 2D animation holds up better than a low budget 3D animation. But in recent years, a lot of low budget 3D animation has really started to improve with new programs being freely available like Blender. When the Web of Fear animation came out, although I was quite critical of the character work, a crime against humanity, looks like a Roblox.
I get it!
I thought the sets and the camera movement was a real improvement over 2D. You could get closer to the original episode in that sense, since the original was in a 3D space. In the Celestial Toymaker animation, you can see this benefit come out even more. Because the character movement is so much more naturalistic in this animation, I could really appreciate the blocking of the characters more. In 2D, they generally seem to stand in a line, whereas here you can have them move all over the set and it feels more staged, yet more organic. It's closer to real life. The camera can now fly anywhere it wants, and thankfully the director uses this sparingly. So when the camera did do its massive movements, it was usually in tone with the scene. It was just reserved for the big moments, and I think it pays off. It does make you think, does this style work for the Celestial Toymaker because it's an experimental, weird story? Would this style be out of place in something like The Mythmakers? I'm not sure. Either way, I'd love to see what this team could do next. The story. I'm not going to go too deeply into the story since I want to avoid narrative spoilers, but Steven and Dodo's dynamic in the story I think is really great. Dodo is the more compassionate, if somewhat naive of the two. She sees the humanity within the toys, yet with Steven, he sees the Toymaker for who he is, and he can see the danger. The two clash over this, which makes it a lot more interesting. We can chalk it up to Steven traveling with the Doctor for longer than Dodo, or it could be some old-fashioned sexism or ageism at play. For my personal enjoyment, it's nicer to think of the initial reading, but you could also obviously read it the other way. I think Steven being aware of the danger makes the stakes feel higher. The story itself isn't really my favourite, as I've said about 1,000 times in this video, but the animation is my personal preference about how I will be watching this story in the future. But for those who wish to watch something closer to the original production, there is a photo reconstruction included on this release, with some incredible CGI sequences by the wonderful Iz Skinner. So make sure you check that out. It's also a great way to imagine how the original story was seen back in the 1960s. I like to think of photo reconstructions as a historical document, a peek into the past, but they're not the most entertaining way of watching a story. I feel that animations are a more fun way of experiencing the story, but aren't the best at capturing the original. Both have their place, and I think it's great that as Doctor Who fans, we get to have that choice. Because there's heaps of programs out there and films that are missing completely, and they've got nothing like this. Final thoughts. I was really hesitant about this release at first. The initial trailer left me feeling really disappointed. I wasn't a fan of the likenesses, and I was concerned about the constant flashy camera movements, and I really didn't like the Web of Fear animation. Just in case you didn't realize, just because I never bring it up on this channel, not ever, but I told myself to wait until it came out to pass judgment. And I'm so happy I waited, because this animation is surprisingly one of my favorites to come out in recent years. The Underwater Menace animation left me feeling cold, and I thought the Abominable Snowman animation was just fine. And Galaxy 4 I really didn't like. So it was nice to get an animation I honestly really enjoyed. I think it's an important reminder to myself to not base my opinion on something I haven't watched yet. So if you saw the trailer and said no thanks, maybe give it a go and see if you've changed your mind. I've had this exact conversation with a bunch of people who came to the same conclusion as me. But then again, some people despise this animation, so you may not change your mind. There is no right or wrong when it comes to media. Just make your own mind up. Don't parrot the opinion of YouTubers. Unless it's me, because I'm always correct. The future of animations. At the moment, it's gone pretty quiet on the missing episode animation rumour front. The only rumour I've heard is The Smugglers, but that's it. I'm hoping that this isn't the end of the range, as we thought it was in the past. A new colorization is being worked on. The story hasn't been revealed at the time of writing the script, but I'm looking forward to that. But I'd be very surprised if this was the end of the range. I'm sure there's more to come. As long as there's Doctor Who fans who are willing to spend money, the BBC will be taking our coins.
We take the cash, we cash the check, we show them what they want to see.
The stories I'd like to see most animated would be probably Marco Polo, The Mythmakers, Master Plan, The Massacre, and The Savages. So pretty much anything starting with the letter M or has savages in it. But of course, any story they choose, I'll be happy. I just hope that after they've done the missing episodes, maybe they'll tackle something else. Maybe some brand new stories of previous Doctors, or maybe even animating some Big Finish, who knows. It's strange though. The team who did Power, Macra, Faceless, and Evil were my favourite team. Then the Unwanted came out, and it was not to my taste, let's just say that. The colour choices and the lack of lighting was an electric chair offence, let's just say that. I just think they need to bring back Rob Ritchie, who did all the compositing for all those animations that I loved, and then I'll be happy. Justice for Rob Ritchie, am I right? Then the team who did Web of Fear 3, who, as you guessed it, I wasn't a big fan of, did this, and I think this animation is brilliant. So I guess I can't really predict what team is going to knock it out of the park next. So, what did you think of the Celestial Toymaker animation? Have you had a chance to watch it yet? And what story would you like to see animated next? Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nez YouTube channel. I miss saying that.